Welcome to our Friday interviews. I'm so excited today to have the opportunity to interview Dr. Thomas Verny, a psychiatrist and a wonderful human being who has written many, many books. Uh, Today, we're going to be talking a bit about his most recent book, The Embodied Mind, and I think you're going to find it fascinating. I first met Dr. Verny a few centuries ago, feels like. But anyway, I think in the mid 80s, I had read his book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, and it really opened my eyes to how powerful our mind is. And we're going to talk about the fact that the mind is not just in the brain, but that it's everywhere in our body and actually everywhere present. So if you will join me in welcoming Dr. Verny. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
And I hope we're going live. I don't see it yet. Okay, it'll happen. Anyway, what an exciting time. It's been a few years since we last met in Dallas. Um, and as I told you before, your work, especially that first work, I know you'd been doing lots of work before that, but that your first book was just an amazing experience for me. So let's start by just telling our audience a little bit about you, yourself, how you got started in this amazing work, and then we'll see what flows from there. Okay.
Okay. Are you asking me to talk about that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it's hard to know where it all started. I I suppose that it started with a well. I've always been interested in dreams, and
Mhm.
that goes back to when I was actually 13 years old. And I read Freud's interpretation of dreams, and I just totally fell in love with that. I really, really liked his approach. I liked the logic of the gradual sort of discovery of what's behind, kind of an anthropological way of looking at the psyche. It just really resonated with me. And so then and there, I made up my mind that I would become a psychiatrist, and I did. And as a young psychiatrist, I continued my interest in dreams. And one day, one of my patients, in the midst of discussing his dream, started crying like a little baby. And he did that for about 10 minutes. I did not interrupt. And then he came out of it, so to speak. And I asked him what happened. And he said that he had just found himself in a crib. He was a little baby. He was crying for his mother, and he was in a crib. And then he said, being a somewhat skeptical young lawyer, he said, well, there's something wrong with this picture that I have sort of, just experienced, because the crib that I've just found myself in right now, a minute ago, was white. And I've actually seen photographs of myself as a baby, and they seem to have always been taken in a blue crib. So he was still a young man. I asked him to go home, talk to his mother about this. And he came back next week and he said, this is amazing. It seems that the first few months of my life, my parents did not have enough money to buy me a new crib, and they borrowed a crib from a neighbor. And that crib, my mother says, was white. And
Mhm.
only a few months later did they have enough money. Me being a boy, they bought a blue crib, and that's the one that all the pictures, photographs were taken in.
That's amazing.
It is amazing, but I'm sure you will resonate to this. I was very well educated. I went to the University of Toronto. I went to Harvard, and we were taught that children before the age of 2 don't remember anything, right?
Mhm.
So this just couldn't be. And although I paid some attention to it, thank God. Um, I did not pay too much attention to it. But then, as time would have it, uh, more and more of these little incidents started to happen. And of course, I was already sort of paying attention because of this one experience. And just to give you another example, I was listening to the radio and there was an interview with Boris Brott, who at that time was a young conductor who became one of the best conductors in Canada. And he was being asked, well, he went through the whole interview like you and I are speaking now. But at the end of the interview, he was asked, well, Mr. Brott, um, where do you think your musical career started? And he said, it started in my mother's womb. Well, of course, everybody, this was like 1979, before the publication of my book. This was like totally, totally untread territory, like this was virgin territory. And so they said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, it seems that when I was just a young conductor, sometimes before I even turned the page, the cello line would jump out at me. Like I knew, without ever having studied this, what the next few notes might be or will be. So then I went home and I spoke to my mother, Boris Brott said, and she said, what are the pieces that seem so familiar to you? And he told her, and she said, those are the pieces that I was playing um, while I was pregnant with you. So again, I sort of listened to this, and then, interestingly enough, I spoke to an obstetrician, a friend of mine, and I told him about some of these incidents, and he just shook his head and would not believe any of it. But he said, kind fellow that he was, he said, in a couple of months in Rome, there is a very large international meeting of psychosomatic obstetrics and gynecology. And everybody who is anybody in the world, including R.D. Lang, I'm sure you know him, Scottish psychiatrist, very well known, like everybody who had a name was going to be there. Why don't you submit a paper? So I did. I submitted a paper which was called The Psychic Life of the Unborn Child. And lo and behold, I'll make this very short, it was accepted. Not only was it accepted, but it was put on the morning on the morning panel, on the morning program, preceded by R.D. Lang. So, like everybody was there. There were 500 people in the audience, and I was given 20 minutes. And as I came to the end of my talk, I noticed that there was tremendous excitement in the crowd. Like you could feel the excitement. Like people were really really activated by this. And so I said, well, at 5 o'clock at the end of our sessions, if anybody wants to discuss this further with me, come to my room. And I gave them the room number. Well, at 5 o'clock, there was this huge crowd, including R.D. Lang, who wanted to talk to me. So I made the acquaintance of of many of these leading lights, and then I thought, well, here is an idea that seems to be acceptable to people in the know. And so that's when I started writing the book. I called it The Psychic Life of the Unborn Child, but then the publisher, Simon and Schuster, changed it because they thought that it was too wild, off the wall. So they changed it to The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. So that became successful beyond my wildest dreams. Like it changed my life.
Too.
And it changed the life I hear of many, many people. It has been published now in 28 languages, and it continues to be published in other countries. Next year, it will be published in Slovakia, for example. So it just continues to gain more and more acceptance. But one of the things that always bothered me since I published the book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, was that there were people that I spoke to who seemed to remember things that happened to them before the last trimester. I had a lot of good scientific evidence to support my contention that children from the end of the second trimester, in other words, about 6 months after conception, still in utero, are able to lay down memories and are capable of some primitive cognition, like having dreams, for example. So that was pretty clear. There was good scientific evidence to support that. But there was no scientific evidence to support any memories going back further in time, in some cases, even to conception and preconception. So
Mhm.
that bothered me for a long time. And then about 9 years ago, I was reading this journal, this medical journal, and I came across a case report of a 44-year-old Frenchman who went to see his doctor because he had some kind of a weakness in his left leg. And when all kinds of tests were done, including a skull x ray, it was discovered that the man had virtually no brain. He had a thin crust, a thin crest of brain tissue, and the rest of his skull was filled with fluid. We call it hydrocephalus, of course, in medicine. Yet this man, 44 years old, was the father of two children and gainfully employed in the French civil service. For all intents and purposes, he was normal. So I thought to myself, how is this possible? How is this possible that a person without a brain, virtually without a brain, is able to function so well? So that's what, just like the young man with his dream, with his sort of regression to child to being an infant, started me on the path to the secret life of the unborn child. This um, reading this case report started me on a course to my most recent book, The Embodied Mind.
Yeah, and it's interesting how we carry the thread of things until we get to greater understanding. I actually had a patient of mine who was 3 weeks old when he came into my care and had gross hydrocephalus. And over the years, his little body gradually grew into his brain, to his head. And when I left Dallas many years later, I got a message from his mother saying that he was doing great, that
Ha!
he had the same thing, just barely any cortex left from all the pressure and the fluid from the buildup.
Right.
So it's amazing. And, I think that there's so many exciting things in your book. And I've underlined almost every other word about all the way back from the memories of the one-celled animals. Can you just speak a little bit about the progression in your book and the key things that stood out for you that were the most exciting? That's kind of a broad question, but
Well, I understand it. Well, we start with genetics because that's how we come into the world, through genetics, through the ovum and the sperm meeting. Um, and I think the science of epigenetics really is such a gift to humanity, really, um, because you know um, up to about 20 or 30 years ago, geneticists believed that genes were your destiny and that you were totally under the control of your genes. And that had huge implications. Um, I mean, this was the whole era of both in the United States, but particularly, of course, under Nazi Germany, of trying sort of to make sure that that only people who are acceptable to the government will have children, because that's how you are going to make the nation great and wonderful and strong and all that jazz. So um, epigenetics, the discovery of epigenetics, and that's where I started my book. The discovery of epigenetics has given us the tools to really, in a sense, fashion ourselves. We gain a tremendous amount of control of our lives and the lives of our children, future children, by living, for example, healthy lives. So, if parents want to have healthy children, they should start by being healthy before conception, because as I set out in my book, there's a great deal of research. There's a great deal of research to show that, for example, fathers who smoke and then con- help to conceive a child, their smoking will have an effect on their sperm, which of course then will have an effect on the future child. So even before conception, by becoming aware of many of this research, um, we can make sure that our children will be healthy, or as healthy as is possible in this day and age. So, and then of course, everything that we experience, we may in some way pass on to our children, and that's a whole other area we can go into if you like. But in terms of genetics and epigenetics, it is, it's so interesting that when scientists don't understand something, they tend to disregard it. Like, 95% of the genome was considered junk because only 5% of it was was covered by genes. So geneticists said, "Oh, that's junk DNA. That's nothing." Now we know. Now we know that the 95% is really all made up of switches, acetyl and methyl groups to be exact. And depending which of the switches is on or off, that will determine which of our genes will be active or non-active.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we speak right now, some of our genes are being turned on, some are being turned off. Um, the people who are listening to this are experiencing the same thing. May I tell you of an experiment that shows this so clearly, and it's a magnificent experiment by Professor Gene Robinson at Illinois University. And what he did was that he took two beehives. One beehive was made up of bees which were European bees, and they were fairly gentle bees by and large. The other beehive were African killer bees. That's what they are called. This is not racism. That's what they were called. And they were much, much more aggressive. And what he did, and you can only do this when you have postdoc students, what he did was that he asked his students to take, I think, about 300 newborn bees from each beehive and put them into the other beehive. This is called cross fostering. And so he took the gentle European newborn bees and put them into the African beehive and vice versa. Within a few weeks, the behavior of these bees totally changed. The gentle European bees became just as violent, just as aggressive as the rest of the beehive that they were put into, and vice versa. But not only that, their genes changed. So, as a result of being in a different environment, genes and behavior changed. I think this is such a beautiful experiment. And if you think about, for example, lynching mobs, or if you think of January 6th in Washington, right?
Mhm.
Um, you can see how perhaps perfectly normal people who are not violent will become violent, will become aggressive if the majority of the people surrounding them is that way. So this has huge implications for crowds of people, for example, um, and vice versa. If you have a peaceful kind of an assembly, uh, even the violent, potentially violent people in that crowd will become calmer. So your environment has a huge impact on how you think and feel and act.
Absolutely. Those are powerful, powerful. Yeah, because the energy when you talked about the energy of the heart, the
Mm,
energy of the heart goes out huge, and if the person is contracted, and closed down, the energy's small. Okay, and that may have something to do with how many people have heart attacks. Not
yes,
only their lifestyle, but that's part of your lifestyle. Your consciousness.
yes.
Um,
And now that you speak of the heart, I mean, um, you know, heart, heart trans. What's the word I'm looking for? Heart donors and
Transplants.
and heart. What's
Transplants.
yeah, heart
Right.
transplants. Yes, yes. Getting older, I'm afraid. So heart transplants. I mean, heart transplants are a beautiful example of memory transfer. They're a beautiful living example of how cells, particularly cells as a networks of cells, can transfer memory. And so, I find it very, very instructive to look at heart transplants. But of course, most cardiologists will not even consider that because that's not what they learned in school. And unfortunately, most doctors, and I'm sure you have observed this in your life, most doctors sort of hold on to the kinds of information that they were given while they were studying medicine, and then they are reluctant, to say the least, opposed uh, to change. And
Yeah.
they will not accept any new ideas because it's just not comfortable.
I know. I see it all the time. There. Some people say that traditional doctors are a good 20 years behind
Absolutely.
recent research. And you have to study all the time. And I do.
So do I.
Gosh, I was determined to read your wonderful book, uh, cover to cover, and before we had this, but I couldn't stop reading it. And there's just so much. The whole idea. Let's talk about. Okay, so go on about the transplants. What happened to
Yeah.
at
Well,
least some of the people who were more aware?
yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned that because I think in order to become aware of the difference that happens after a heart transplant, in order to become aware of it, you have to have a certain degree of insight. You
Mhm.
have to have a certain degree of psychological interest in terms of who am I, right? And a lot of people don't have that. So they don't even notice
Yeah.
that certain transformation has occurred. Um, so, like, I came across quite a number of very, very, very interesting cases. For example, I write about I write about a 19-year-old woman who was killed in an automobile accident, and her heart was given to a 29-year-old woman. And I will read this because I think that one of the reasons that I'm so interested in memory, apart from what I told you, is that I have a lousy memory. So, so I often need a little bit of prompting. So I'm just going to look at this. So the donor's mother reported, my Sarah was the most loving girl. She owned and operated her own health food restaurant and scolded me constantly about not being a vegetarian. She was a great kid, wild but great. She was into the free love thing and had a different man in her life every few months. She was man crazy when she was a little girl and it never stopped. She was able to write some notes to me when she was dying. She was so out of it, but she kept saying how she could feel the impact of the car hitting her. She said she could feel it going through her body. Now, what did the recipient say? The recipient has said the following. Um, You can tell people about this if you want to, but it will make you sound crazy. She's certainly correct about that, you know. I have spoken to quite a number of cardiologists and they just shook their heads. When I got my new heart, this young lady continues, two things happened to me. First, almost every night, and still sometimes now, I actually feel the accident my donor had. I actually feel the
Mhm.
accident my donor had. I can feel the impact in my chest. It slams into me. But my doctor said everything looks fine. I couldn't tell him. But what really bothers me is that I'm engaged to be married now. He's a great guy and we love each other. The sex is terrific. The problem is I'm gay. At least I thought I was. After my transplant, I'm not. I don't think anyway I am. I'm sort of semi or confused gay. Women still seem attracted to me, but my boyfriend really turns me on. Women don't. I have absolutely no desire to be with a woman. I think I got a gender transplant. Also, I hate meat now. I can't stand it. I was McDonald's biggest moneymaker, and now meat makes me throw up. I actually, when I smell it, my heart starts to race. But that's not the big deal. My doctor said, that's just due to my medication.
Oh, I love the answers. The simple two-dimensional answers that we hear from
That's right. Yeah,
well-meaning doctors,
it's,
but
it's yeah, it's a virus or,
a
a
virus. Yeah.
justification or whatever it is. Simple explanations of very, very complex phenomena. Um, and the important thing is, and this is like 100% scientific, is the fact that, the heart exudes like vibrations, huge amount of energy, much more than the brain actually. So, the vibrations that the heart puts out, the electromagnetic vibrations, are extremely strong. And so they affect other people close to you. And when we speak, let's say, of sometimes like you have this gut kind of a response to a person, either negative or positive. Well, it's not your gut, it's really your heart. Okay, your heart is picking up vibrations from the other person's heart, and you either resonate with it, in which case you will feel friendly and good about the other person, or somehow you don't. And your vibrations and his or her vibrations interfere with each other, and there is going to be a feeling of strangeness or even animosity. So, we greatly underestimate the heart. And yet, in common parlance, I mean, we have all these things that we say, like we talk about, she died of a broken heart, right?
Mhm.
Or, um, your heart is full of, your heart is full, or heartfelt sympathy, or any of these things. Um, And the most well-known one, I think, is by Blaise Pascal, who said, "The heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing."
Yeah.
I mean, imagine saying this, "Oh, the kidney has its reasons. Oh, the kidney has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing." Oh, only a comedian would say that, right?
Yeah, and the fact that the heart is in the center of
Yes,
our being,
yes,
okay? And I think the thing that we want to be sure people understand is that the mind is not just in the brain that's in the skull. And this just the implications of it is just so powerful.
yes,
Every cell in our body an intelligent essence, and
yes.
how cells communicate with one another. The first time I heard that was many years ago. I think it was Marilyn Ferguson who wrote a book. I forgot the
Mhm.
name of the book, but she talked about how the cells would actually communicate with each other through energy, through vibration. And I'd never heard that before. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And that has such an important thing to do with healing. Even the laying on of hands, or people
Mhm.
who do body work. Sometimes right now I'm so excited I can feel the energy of my hand as I come together.
Absolutely.
And and I think in the work that I do, I want that to get through to people, that they already have a vibrant healing energy within themselves. And what we have to do is get the things that are harming them out of the way and allow that to come through. And our belief system has a huge impact on that. If you believe that you're going to die of heart disease because your mother did at 50, that's going to make it hard not to have that happen in your life. So, let's just talk a little bit more about
Sure.
that, okay?
Sure. Well, let me give you another study, which is so fantastic, so simple, so to the point. Dr. Dr. Ellen Langer from Harvard University, a psychologist, did a very simple study that could be replicated all over the place if anybody wanted to. If any of our listeners want to do a simple study, and what she did was she took 82 um, hotel maids in New York and divided them into two groups, 41 each. And one group, she told that what they did every day in terms of cleaning hotel rooms was sort of the equivalent of what the attorney, was it not attorney general, uh, what was it? Oh, Surgeon General, yes. The Surgeon General in the United States recommended as daily exercise. And so what they did was the equivalent of normal daily exercise as recommended by the Surgeon General. The other group was told something different, but nothing like that. Um, after 30 days, after 30 days, um, the women in the group who believed that they were exercising when in fact they were doing nothing different from the other group, they were just continuing to clean the rooms as they always did. They lost weight, uh, their blood pressure dropped, um, many indices of good health improved remarkably in 30 days, although they did nothing different except that they believed that they did something different.
Yeah, that's
You know,
amazing.
what you have said is so true. And then we have things like placebos, of course, where if you tell someone that this is a very powerful drug and it will make you sleep 8 hours if you take it at 10 o'clock at night, and you don't watch too much TV, the person will the chances are that they will sleep extremely well, when in fact it was just a sugar pill. But if they believe that it's a powerful hypnotic, if they believe that it's a powerful drug that will make them sleep, the chances are that it will make them sleep. And again, it's just your belief system. And there's tremendous amount of research done on this and hypnosis, which again is sort of a way of helping people really achieve what they want to achieve. I mean, you can't tell someone to do something that they would not want to do, but if they want to do it, then it's really very, very helpful.
Yeah, uh, the idea of the mind body is that even goes to our microbiome. I think you mentioned
Yeah.
several things about the microbiome.
Yes,
There's a book I have on my shelf called The Mind Gut or Gut Mind, and about how our emotions come from our microbiome. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. There is so much research now on the microbiome, and just for our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, microbiome includes like all the bacteria and viruses that we carry in our gut, and they weigh about 5 pounds. Like there's a lot of stuff in there, and most of these are very helpful. They really um, there's a common misperception that bacteria are sort of not helpful to your health, but actually they're absolutely necessary for good health as long as you have a very divergent microbiome. And what has been found, which I thought was extremely interesting, uh, was the fact that people who are lonely, and of course, a lot of elderly people fall into that category, people who are lonely have a much more restricted microbiome. Um, so it is not clear whether loneliness brings about a more restricted microbiome or whether a lack of a divergent microbiome leads to loneliness. But the fact is that the more varied your microbiome is, uh, the less lonely you will be. And also, this is amazing, but I have the study, you will be wiser. You will be smarter if your microbiome is sort of divergent, like it has many different bacteria in it. uh, you will be wiser and you will be more social. So it's incredibly important to have a good microbiome. And I guess one of the things that happens as you get older is that you probably don't shop as much as you used to, perhaps, especially if you are alone, if your partner has passed away, right? You shop less, you eat less, you eat a more boring diet. Sometimes, I mean, some people only have cornflakes and milk all day. So, I mean, that would not give you a good microbiome. And then that will play into loneliness and also perhaps cognitively, you will become more impaired.
Well, anytime I hear somebody who has any kind of mood disorder, be it anxiety or depression, I always have to look at their gut. You
Yes,
know, I do stool analysis on my patients, most everyone, because if their microbiome is not in enough abundance or not diverse enough, like you're talking
yep,
about,
yes, yes.
it affects them. And you talk about depression and gut issues.
Well, you are the first doctor actually that I have met, so to speak, um, who actually does microbiome analysis. That is amazing. That blows me away.
Well, it's a part of functional medicine, and that's why that was one of the first things that I learned as I started learning more about the functional medicine approach was that God, everything starts in the gut,
Yes.
and if we have an unhealthy gut, and
Yeah.
that has to do with an unhealthy diet, which we know, unfortunately, our food source is so contaminated
Yes.
with toxins
Right.
like glyphosate,
Yes.
which can just destroy the microbiome. It's going to have a huge impact on every part of our body.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Well, as you well know, it's the vagus nerve. the 10th cranial nerve, is the one that connects the heart and the gut and the
Mhm.
brain. So the vagus nerve really is the main highway
Yeah.
that connects the brain to the heart and the gut. And most sort of most middle of the road classically trained medical doctors, talk about psychosomatics and observe the language. It's psychosomatics, in other words, from the psyche to the soma. What they disregard and what I'm trying to focus on is the bi-directionality of this flow of information. In other words, it's not just top down, which is what they mean by psychosomatics. So if you're anxious, you will develop an ulcer, according to them. But they never look at what's happening in the gut that is going to influence the brain.
Yeah.
So this is where the two of us, I think, really see eye to eye, because you, like myself, we appreciate the fact that what happens in the body affects the brain, affects the mind. And let me say one thing about the mind. Um, a lot of neuroscientists, when you ask them, where is the mind, will say, well, it's an epiphenomenon, which is a big word, for it's a function of the brain. So the mind is a function of the brain, just like urine is a function of the kidneys. Now, anybody who listens to that, I mean, it seems to me that any normal, intelligent person who listens to this has got to stop and say, hey, come on, this doesn't make sense. Urine you can see, you can smell, you can do all kinds of experiments on. The mind is something totally different. It's an abstraction. You
Yeah,
can't you,
it
you,
is.
you can't see it. You can't do anything with it. How can you say that it's a function of the brain? Um, yes, I'm sure I'm sure the brain has a lot to do with the mind, but it's not just the brain. It's really, all the feedback loops that we have in our bodies, from the brain to the heart to the gut, from every particle in our bodies that really produces, I believe, consciousness and the mind. And there may be more to it than that, too. I mean, I'm open to the possibility that there is a universe out there, and that we are connected to all kinds of forces that we just simply don't understand.
And that's so true. And I, one of the reasons I wanted to interview you is because sometimes I think if people can hear someone else saying what I try to say, uh, it's more believable. But the the idea of everything being connected,
Yes,
we just can't get our mind around. I mean, it's hard to get your mind around it, wherever that mind may be, in your
yes,
body or in your head. But uh, that's why everything matters. There's a spiritual teacher that I listen to a lot. He says everything belongs. We belong to each other, and as you're talking about the energy of the heart, and when you come across somebody who is closed down or has a negative vibration,
yes,
I feel it immediately.
yes,
And some people are more sensitive than others.
right.
Some people are almost half dead walking around in a body that seems to move around. But what do you think we should leave our wonderful audience with, about the work you've done and how powerful it is for health and for a sense of life purpose and vitality? That's a big question.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's very difficult to answer it briefly. I would certainly come up with a few answers, because I don't think one is enough for such a complex and important question. I think you just mentioned several things. First of all, everything is connected.
Mhm.
There's simply no doubt about it. And we started talking about epigenetics, and that shows us, how much we depend on our environment, and
Mhm.
so, sometimes geneticists will say, well, schizophrenia is 30% genetic and 70% environmental. That is ridiculous. That is so, so ridiculous because nobody knows. Nobody knows. Uh, we, these are things that are just not yet known. And when a scientist says something like that, people believe that that particular scientist is speaking out of some academic knowledge that he has
Oh,
acquired, when in fact there is no such thing. Okay,
mhm.
so uh, everything is connected. We don't know how much of whoever we are is genetic and how much is epigenetic, but if we know that it's due to a dynamic interaction between the two. That much we know.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we know is, again, we have mentioned this in our discussion here today, is the tremendous power of the mind. And people are not using this enough. Uh,
Mhm.
I would really encourage people to think of all the research which is present in my book, and I'm sure in many of the talks that you give, um, that we can really influence our lives uh, to a great extent, by thinking in healthy ways, by surrounding ourselves with healthy people. As a psychiatrist, I have worked for many, many, many years with people who, for example, are trying to gain the love of a father or a mother or a sister who has never really respected or valued them.
Yeah.
And they spend their life trying to change, let's say, an unloving father into a loving father. And that is a fool's enterprise. Don't do that. Don't do that. Surround yourself by people who already love you, and don't try to convince someone who does not seem to love you. Forget it.
Yeah,
So I
and that brings
yeah,
another thing that maybe we'll do this again next year,
sure.
talking about trauma.
Yes.
You know, I have all my new patients fill out the adverse childhood experience
Mhm.
questionnaire, and I can predict. Sometimes I can predict when I see them, they're going to
Yes,
have a high score,
yes,
or if I see a high score, and if they're honest in their answering the question of how
yes,
the impact that has on their cells, their body, it's just, I get stuttering trying to talk it out, but yeah, there's just so
yes.
much.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would like to mention is uh, that materialism and determinism are sciences sort of Tweedly dumb and Tweedly dee. Like, science totally relies on materialism and determinism, and that has been sort of a product, an epiphenomenon, if you like, a product of a very patriarchal society that we have, been living for the last, I don't know how many thousands of years. But it seems to me that from the beginning of whatever we call civilization, it has been a patriarchal society, and the patriarchal society goes about building hierarchies. So, you know, the head of the family, the chief of the tribe, it's always the head, the chief, the top. And so this has been absorbed by our culture and also by medicine and sciences. So there's this huge reliance on the brain because it's in the head, right? And so everything is looked at top down instead of bottom up.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is to sort of bring about a more balanced approach. a more balanced approach to our bodies and our minds, to emphasize the fact the bottom up is just as important as top down. I'm not minimizing the importance of the brain. Of course, it matters. But also, we have talked about the gut, we have talked about the heart. Then there are these millions and millions of other tissues and cells which are also important. So I just want people to become more aware of their bodies and not put sort of all their focus on the brain and the head, because it also leads to determinism and materialism, and it takes us away from spiritualism.
Wow, that's profound. Yeah, we do have a tendency in our traditional society to to dissect everything up and then give it more importance, lesser importance. But everything matters. Okay,
Yes.
and gosh, Dr. Verny, it looks like we may be running out of time here, but I want to just put a couple of things that people have said.
Okay.
Okay, this is a comment. I've always been interested in the memories that come up during the massage, seemingly from nowhere. And boy, I work with a wonderful manual therapist, Dr. Joan Sloss, and she's probably in the next room listening. But so many, you don't know what's going to happen when you touch that body, and the memory pops up. Or people start crying.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see what else we've got here. Here is somebody who says, I love this in your work, Dr. Verny. My best friend, who is a heart transplant recipient, had a dream shortly after his transplant that I believed was a memory that this heart shared with him that was related to the donor's life.
Ah,
so it's out there, the whole idea of it, Okay, let's see what this one says. The power of the mind, placebo effect is real. And somebody said, thank you for the reference to Dr. Langer's research. And let me see what this one is. Thank you so much. Incredibly informative and inspirational interview. And it doesn't look like anybody have any last minute questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Now, for those of you who are on the Facebook group, you know that this will be immediately on the page as a recording, and it will also be on our YouTube channel, Healing Unleashed. So I thank you so much. The last time we got together, we went out to dinner after our interview or whatever, our seminar, and really had a great time. So I thank you so much. And if you're willing to come back again, when I get a divine inspiration of something that we need to tell people about, I will reach out to you. Okay.
Absolutely. Anytime you want to, I would love to come back and chat with you. Absolutely. It was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm going to put how they can go to your website and also your podcast, which I've started listening to some of them. They're really pretty amazing. I'll put that in the comment box after we're done. Okay.
Yes. And also I have blogs on Psychology Today.
That's right. Okay. That's on your website.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bless you. Bless you. Bless you.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.